Hey everybody, welcome back to this live episode of Think Business. Looking forward to talking with James Giancotti. James, it's good to connect with you. You're the co-founder and CEO of Oddup, a startup rating system. And I'm looking forward to diving into talking about you and your company. You're all about intelligent insights that are optimized, data-driven insights for basically helping companies like the Bloombergs and the JP Morgans, et cetera, understand the new world economy. And so let's talk about that. You know, what is the new world economy, right? Are we in it or are we moving towards it?
I think we've been in it for a while. I think it's getting newer by the second. And firstly,
newer by the second, right? Yeah. So define it today and define it. You know, because to me, what I love about data is it's a major indicator on how people forecast. Mm-hmm. And so talk about kind of where we are today with the new economy and what that new economy looks like maybe 12 months from today.
Well, maybe I'll give you maybe two steps back when you ask what does the new economy look like? Well, the new economy for the past 10 to 15 years has been startup space, and startup space has been growing and becoming tech has been part of our livelihoods every single day. So that's the first step of the new economy. The second step is what's happening right now. We've seen the emergence of cryptocurrencies and other blockchain-related companies, which have got a plethora of data because they trade exactly like public companies, where that information is coming up to create essentially the new economy. When people talk about Web 3.0 and Web 2.0, they're effectively talking about more and more data points to get information on to make better decisions.
Yeah. So let's talk about the startup economy, and the blockchain economy. Cool. You know, so I'm going to be 50 years old today. I started an internet company in 1995, and ultimately with my brother and a buddy, we sold it. But there were startups going on left and right, you know, back in 1995. And so you're talking about also kind of what the last 10 years, even more startups. When we look at studies that are pointing to the year 2030, 85% of the jobs that exist don't exist today, right? So we know there's going to be a ton more startups. We look at the millennial generation and then specifically the creative first person storytelling, Gen Zers who are going to be a large percentage of the economy, driving the economics in 2030. It seems like we're going to be in a startup for the next 10 years. Enter now blockchain and how everything's evolving there, and we'll basically reface everything. How does somebody start to study what this is today to get some basic fundamentals of what they need to learn so they don't fall behind?
Well, that's a really good question. Firstly, happy birthday.
Thanks.
There is a lot to come out. And the best thing is that for everyone is there's a tool called the internet and there's a starting point. So that's a good sign. The second sign is that, particularly the last 2 years with the pandemic, everyone's changed, and there's been a heap of people who want to sort of look at, running their own ship, running their own startup, running their own, and building from that. And so, of course, there's a lot of automation that will remove jobs, but to find that information is actually right there in front of you. We're one of the sources because we're looking at other companies to compare yourself to. Let's say you want to start up a startup that wants to do food delivery, for instance. There's 1,000 other companies out there that are trying to get in this space, and about 3 or 4 that are really succeeding. And the best thing about what the data of today on startups and also blockchain companies are showing you is that there is enough information for you to not make the same mistakes, because you're actually looking at the data that's come from the last 10, 15 years, as well as information that's coming at any second of the mistakes they're making, so you don't make those mistakes. So there is so much information to start with, and it's almost like, how big's a piece of string. But I always go to entrepreneurs who are looking at, let's say they go into a particular industry, let's, for example, call it food delivery, start looking at all the information just on Google on those companies. And then if you want more granular detail, use a tool like Oddup to get into how much they raise, who they raise their money from. How can that information help them raise their next step?
Right. As I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about two things. One, when you talk about, hey, there's this thing called the internet, like start studying and doing some research. There's an amazing TED talk by Jeff Hoffman. Jeff Hoffman. It's the TEDx Wall Street TED talk. It's called The Power of Wonder. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but in it, he's the founder of Priceline. And in it, he talks about, he starts every morning off with something he calls 15 minutes. I think it's 15 minutes of info sponging, which is basically learning everything about everything except his industry outside of those, right? So studying everything that's going on, because those indicators will ultimately, and I think will ultimately help evolve his company and any company. And I think that's really important. But I want to get back to when you talk about food delivery, because I think a lot of people will look at this and say, okay, there's DoorDash, there's Grubhub. I have this idea, but there's already two players in that space. I'm just, I know there's more, but just for the sake of this discussion. But I don't think that's holding people back today, because I think everyone is looking at how to do it more effectively, differently, with different ideas and carrying their own frequency and vibration of what that is. And so talk a little bit about how not to just toss an idea because there may be players in that arena.
It's a great actually example, because I'll use the example from my hometown, Melbourne in Australia. The Uber Eats, the DoorDashes are there, but people forgot there was actually a lot of Asian-led businesses, meaning your cafes, your dim sum places, and lo and behold, a Chinese Australian entrepreneur started a company to do exactly that, because the founders, or sort of the restaurant owners, didn't feel comfortable working with Uber or Grubhub and other sources, so they started a company called Easy. And so primarily when they started, they were just doing delivery from Thai, Chinese, Cantonese, every type of Asian restaurant, because they had that rapport, and that was a market that wasn't served by your Uber Eats of the world. So there's always an angle to go from, and then since then they've actually grown to quite a healthy business. So it's actually finding where the problem is. And not everyone solves that problem. If your favorite restaurant's not there, well, then there's a problem to be solved. So there's always ways of looking out for it. But then sometimes people just want to sort of go against them. So I always say that it's best to actually look at where the market is underserved, even in that particular area. So it can be done, and it can be done very easily.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point too, because it's about finding that pain point. I mean, in any story, there's a pain point that people are missing. I mean, just if you look at just a movie, let's just say as an example, you pull 5-10 people of a movie that starts with a painful scene, everyone's going to get something different out of it. I know that because I can say that. I don't know that, but I know when I give a keynote and I ask people, depending on how many people or a collection of people, to go around the room and say, what's your one takeaway? They all take away something different. And so it's finding the sliver of pain, like you said, that's underserved. And I think, and I like that you said that, because I think whoever listens to this, they need to hear that, right? Like dive into the sliver, because that is where you can monetize.
Correct.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about data and the data that you pull at Oddup. So, you guys provide data-driven insights to help companies, like we were saying, like the Bloombergs and the Amazons and the JP Morgans, understand the new world economy, I'm assuming, so they can make data-driven decisions on how to move. But talk a little bit about, what you provide, how you provide it, and what clients are using your data for, and how.
Sure. So we are a major source of data on startups around the world. We started in Asia primarily, but now we're a global company. And so we give companies information such as valuations on companies, their risk rewards, their risk rating, how much money they've raised, a lot of the information that helps you build a understanding of where that company sits. But the main focus is about risk. And because we're giving information towards predominantly large institutions. The main focus of every financial institution is risk and managing risk. And so when we look at risk, we provide that data so they can make that insight and make those decisions. So we look at a company, give it a score between 0 and 100. And from that, we determine the risk of where that company sits. How are they heavily funded? Are they in a very problematic industry? And the companies we work with, as I mentioned, financial industries, they are looking at putting out data and then turning those insights into something that relates back to them. So our data goes on the Bloomberg terminal, on Refinitiv from Thomson Reuters, and we give them that information so they can provide for their clients the pieces of the puzzle that helps solve their data needs.
It's great. It's great. Let's talk about data for a minute.
Sure.
And data that we use for forecasting, and data that works, and to determine what data doesn't work. The story goes that Sam Walton would sit in his boardroom, and all of these people would give him intel and numbers and data. And then he would go to the diner and have coffee and pie with his customers, go back to the conference room, so the story goes, and filter out the data that didn't make sense to their consumer. And so I think sometimes I think data is critical. I love data. It grounds things, it gives direction, but sometimes you also need to kind of marry the science of data with the art of what you're trying to use it for. Interpretation can be and mean everything, and what the consumer wants. So can you just kind of talk about the art and science of that?
Oh, it's a really, really good question. The saying I used to hear was that, people lie, numbers don't. And that is really as clear as it can be with data. So no matter how the data is presented, it's how you interpret it. So, and we see that with particularly investors using our platform, where the data may not suit one investor, but from the others, it looks, it looks crap to one, it looks beautiful to the other.
Right.
And so it's more about where each person who's using that data interprets it. You mentioned before about the movie, how there'll be one scene and 5 different people see it differently. It's exactly the same thing with data. Even though 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 2 makes sense to someone maybe who's a seed stage investor, but doesn't make sense to someone who's a Series D investor. And so the data is there to actually be interpreted more from the customers. And before, when we started as a platform, we always wanted to feel like we needed to give our opinion. We actually didn't. We needed to provide data, because the customers are different, and they determine what that data means to them and their fund thesis or their acquisition targets. It's really about what they're looking at doing. So $1 billion sale to a small startup who just raised 3 is a red flag, but someone who's worth, someone like Microsoft who can buy a Blizzard at any time, it's nothing. So these are the way it can be determined, and how those data points up. So data can become very problematic, but the key thing is look at the numbers as fact, and then as how those numbers relate to what your investment thesis or what you're hoping to achieve with your company, looking at that one.
Yeah, I love it. Right. The data is the people in the room dissecting the data and discussing the data is more if not more important as the data. So I think it's great. So let's talk about, so you're the CEO of Oddup, which we're talking about, and then you're also a dual CEO. You have 2 CEO roles. You're also the CEO of Aluva. Yes. I think I'm pronouncing that right. The largest global analyst marketplace for crypto assets. So let's talk about this, because I think many people, you say crypto and it's like, nobody's really sure exactly what it is, or Gary, what it means. And, I've been studying it, on a pretty consistent basis. So define kind of, and I'm in kindergarten with it. Right. But I know in the next 10 to 15 years, the blockchain, the crypto, the NFTs, this is where the world is moving. I'm going to be 50 this year, and I ordered Oculus a couple months ago because I wanted to get a better idea of virtual reality, because AI and robots and things of that nature are really going to, be at front and center. So talk about kind of like the in layman's terms, the ABC of crypto and what you do in the crypto space.
Okay, so the key thing when we first started Aluva was that everyone wanted to know what was going to happen to the price of Bitcoin. And so we would pull in analysts from around the world to give an opinion. And will it go up? Will it go down? Will it go sideways? Who knows what's happening with crypto? And so the product is aimed at providing different sources of information and to look at analysts and judge their opinion based on how right they're out.
Yeah.
So when we look at crypto, the primary use for most people is to trade the movements of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other currencies. And so when we pull that information out, we're pulling it from multiple sources across the internet. And the beautiful thing about versus a startup space versus crypto is startups tends to be much longer. Investments happen once every 2-3 years, and there's a set rate valuation given by the investor. But with crypto, the valuation changes every second. It's based on up and down. It moves based on Bitcoin, based on Ethereum. And so what we're providing Aluva is to give people that information of, okay, where do we think the price is going and what do the best analysts that we've got say it's going to happen? And that's primarily in the very simplest form.
All right. Well, we're going to have you back and talk more crypto because I'm fascinated by it. I love it. I'm trying to understand more and learn, like Jeff Hoffman talked about, I do my best to on most days, info sponge and crypto and NFTs and blockchain are part of my kind of daily study because I'm going to be 50. I don't want to be 60 and not know what I'm thinking or talking about. James, this has been great. Quick speed round for you. You ready?
Sure.
As a CEO, what's one piece of wisdom that is the best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Don't hire in a rush.
Hire slow, fire fast, right? Or find the right seat. But I couldn't agree more. And if you have the wrong person, let them go. You're doing them a favor.
Correct.
Right? It's actually a gift of love because most people don't have the courage to let people go. Most people, I believe, don't have the courage to leave. So that's a great piece. What has been your favorite book that's gotten you to where you are today?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I actually liked reading Lean In because I liked the different perspective from Sheryl Sandberg.
Yeah.
I liked a different perspective because, no matter if you're female or male, it's all about, how do you manage, what steps you take, how do you manage people and so forth. That's been a great book, but there's so many others. Plus, actually, the best books are actually learning from other entrepreneurs, to be honest. You don't need a book. You need to talk to them. They're the best.
Yeah, I agree. And listen to podcasts like Think Business.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yes.
Well, there is, I think podcasting in real time and quick conversations, learning from guys like you, they are key. Last question. Somebody who doesn't use data and just uses their instincts needs to also use data because
the data is right. Their instincts are never always wrong.
Yeah. The good data can validate mediocre instincts. Yeah, right. James, tell everybody where they can connect with you, learn more about you, and reach out to you if they want to work with you.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at James Giancotti or via Oddup.com. You can find us on the page Oddup.com or Aluva.com. And if there's any entrepreneurs that need some advice, been there, done that, I'm more than happy to help. It's all about recycling help along the way.
Amen to that. Think community, couple highlights I just want to bring up that James talked about today. Data is critical. Forecasting is quintessential to the growth of any company. It doesn't matter if you believe that or not. We need to be able to forecast to make decisions on where we are going. We cannot just use lagging indicators of where we have come from. Not only that, but we need to study and learn blockchain, NFT, and crypto a little bit. So a little bit every day. So James, I appreciate your insights and your knowledge. Thanks for everything that you brought today. Think community, if James can help you, please reach out. Have an awesome day, everybody. Thanks, James.
Thank you.